Picture this. One side has more factories, more oil, more ships. But the side shouting the loudest about honor is the one that ends up starving first. That was Japan in the Pacific War. Japan didn't lose because its soldiers were weak. They fought like hell. It lost because its leaders chose a romantic honor war over the boring grind of fuel, food, and shipping. Now jump to today. We talk about chip wars, sea lanes, sanctions. The real question is simple. When things get serious, do our countries pick cool slogans or cold, hard realism? So let's rewind to the 1940s Pacific. An island empire truly believed that samurai spirit could cover for empty fuel tanks and a much smaller economy. Spoiler, it couldn't. On paper, Tokyo already knew the numbers. The US had roughly 10 times the economic power and much deeper oil. A long war was like going all in with a weak hand. So instead of planning a long, grinding conflict, Tokyo doubled down on a fantasy. Strike hard, win a few decisive battles, and force Washington to negotiate before the fuel ran out. And under that plan sat an older story, the modern samurai myth. Better to die in style than retreat. Better a beautiful loss than a boring, unglamorous win. That mindset decided who got promoted and which missions were cool. Attacking felt noble. Escorting cargo ships, hunting submarines at night, that was background work, not the stuff of legends. So here's our theme. Japan worshipped honor but let its merchant ships sink, its soldiers starve, and its economy choke. In war, legends don't beat logistics. Ever. First, small reality check. The samurai code we know today? It's not some unbroken law from the Middle Ages. A lot of it was rebuilt in the late 1800s to serve a modern empire. Writers polished up stories about loyalty, obedience, and beautiful death. Then the state stuffed that into schools and barracks as the new moral fuel of Japan's rising power. One message hit hardest: a real warrior doesn't surrender. Ever. Getting captured wasn't just personal shame. It dragged down your unit, your family, your village back home. Training films loved bayonet charges and battle cries. Spirit, guts, willpower. Meanwhile, logistics, maintenance, and supply? They were just the background scenery keeping the movie running. Inside the army, there was an invisible ranking. Infantry, armor, frontline killers at the top. Engineers, signal guys, logistics people. Necessary, sure, but not the hero track. The Navy built its own myth. Giant battleships and one huge showdown at sea. Serving on a massive gun platform facing the enemy head-on was the ultimate samurai at sea fantasy. Strategy books drew the same picture again and again. Drag the US across the Pacific, ambush the fleet near Japan, crush it in one perfect Tsushima-style battle. Roll credits. Now compare that to escort duty. You crawl along at low speed, babysitting merchant ships in bad weather, hoping not to get torpedoed. Fewer medals, no glamorous stories at the bar. And here's the key. In any military, what bosses respect is where money and talent go. In Japan, glory tilted toward big offensive punches, not the slow, careful job of guarding supply lines. The sad thing? The numbers were screaming the opposite. With limited industry and fuel, Japan's only real shot was to avoid long meat grinder wars and protect every tanker it had. So you end up with a weird choice. A war that looks like a samurai movie and ends in beautiful defeats, or a boring spreadsheet war that actually keeps you alive. When war started, that samurai filter walked into every strategy meeting. No one totally forgot logistics, but they kept treating it as something you handle later, after the glorious plans. To see how dangerous that is, we have to watch what they actually did once bullets started flying, who they attacked first, and what they failed to guard. In short, Japan fought a war of honor. The US fought a war of shipping. The ending was written long before Hiroshima, long before the last battle. While Japanese planners chased their dream decisive battle, American planners quietly drew lines on a map. Cut oil here, sink tankers here, break transport here. That's the clash that matters most in this story. Heroic duels on one side, economic strangulation on the other. And it's not as far from our world as you might think. Japan's early offensives weren't just about pride. They were a giant shopping trip with guns. Oil in the Dutch East Indies, rubber and tin in Malaya, food and labor across Southeast Asia. At first it worked. Pearl Harbor, Singapore, whole armies collapsing. It felt like proof that bold strikes and spirit really could knock out a richer enemy. But here's the catch. Pearl Harbor sank ships, not shipyards. America's factories, oil fields, and steel mills were untouched and very, very angry. Once the US got serious, it could replace sunken ships faster than Japan could sink them. It could also spit out merchant ships in bulk, like a conveyor belt of floating trucks. Japan was the opposite. Small merchant fleet, limited shipyards. Every tanker that went down wasn't just scrap metal. It was carrying capacity they basically couldn't replace. On top of that, there was no strong shipping boss for the whole war. The Army ran its cargo, the Navy ran its cargo, and they often fought each other harder than they fought submarines. Britain in World War I learned the hard way and went all in on convoys. Japan dragged its feet. Well into the war, ships were still sailing almost alone. Perfect targets for subs. Escort ships and anti-sub work were low-status gigs. They got older gear, fewer elite officers. If you wanted a big career, you aimed for the flashy ships, not the truck guards. A Cy-Young. By 1943, Tokyo drew a proud red arc on the map, the absolute defense line. These islands must never fall. On paper, it looked tough. In reality, it was a wish list. There were just too many dots on the map, and not enough ships, planes, or fuel. Every new garrison was like adding another mouth to feed when you already can't buy groceries. As U.S. subs and planes cut the sea routes, those dots turned into prison islands. Soldiers dug tiny farms, boiled palm oil, and tried to survive far away from any supply ship. Those famous banzai charges? Often they weren't just about fanatical courage. They were final, hopeless pushes by units whose ammo and supplies were basically gone. A more cold-blooded army might have said, "Pull back, save what we can." But in a culture that worshipped last stands, retreat looked uglier than annihilation. So Japan was fighting a feelings-based war, trying to will victory into existence, while America quietly turned it into a spreadsheet war. Tons of cargo moved or destroyed. The star of that spreadsheet war wasn't a huge battleship with a famous admiral. It was a steel tube full of sailors, underwater, unseen, hunting not glory but cargo. Submariners were only a tiny slice of the U.S. Navy. But by the end, they'd sunk more than half of all Japanese merchant shipping lost in the war. Small team. Massive impact. Most of the time, they weren't chasing big warships. They parked themselves near narrow straits and busy sea lanes, waiting for tankers and freighters to roll through like clockwork. Oil from the south was the empire's blood. Sink enough tankers and suddenly planes don't fly, ships don't sail, and training schedules turn into, sorry, no fuel today. By 1944, the noose was tight. Imports of oil and critical materials had fallen off a cliff. At that point, a lot of historians say the war was lost in slow motion. Those numbers weren't just lines on paper. They meant cold barracks, empty plates, and abandoned outposts. Ignoring logistics doesn't only kill plans, it kills people. Here's the twist. American planners had been gaming out a Japan war since long before Pearl Harbor. War Plan Orange already had the idea of creeping west while squeezing Japan's sea lanes. When the real war started, those sketches turned into simple orders. Let subs, planes, and later, aerial mines shut down the Empire's ability to move anything by sea. By 1945, B-29s were dropping thousands of sea mines around Japan's ports and coasts. Even short coastal trips became lottery tickets with "hit a mine" as the bad prize. From Washington's point of view, this wasn't about one epic ship duel. It was about breaking a whole system. Transport, fuel, communications, industry, all at once. There's a famous line. Amateurs talk tactics, professionals talk logistics. Reality is messier, but American grand strategy leaned way closer to that logistics mindset than Japan's did. Japan poured steel and prestige into a few monster battleships. The US sank money into shipyards and submarines, smaller, cheaper tools that could kill commerce all day, every day. If your target is the enemy's economy, one torpedo that sinks an oil tanker can be worth more than dozens of shells hitting a cruiser. That's the ugly math U.S. planners leaned into. Of course, this raised ugly moral questions. Unrestricted submarine warfare blurred the line between soldier and civilian. A lot of merchant sailors died far from any battlefield. A blockade isn't flashy. It doesn't look like an action movie. It just quietly hollows out a country's ability to train, move, and feed people until things fall apart. Inside Japan, many officers could do the math. Reports showed nightmare loss rates for tankers and cargo ships, but turning the whole strategy around was politically and culturally brutal. Admitting that shipping protection came first would mean admitting the war wasn't about heroic duels at all. It was about tonnage. That clashed head-on with years of samurai-style propaganda. Shipping losses hit morale twice. First when ships go down, then again when frontline troops realize no one is coming. There is literally no ship left to send. Back home, queues got longer. Families waited hours for rice, coal, and cooking oil. As state rationing wobbled, black markets popped up everywhere just to keep people afloat. Try filming a submarine waiting underwater for days. Pretty dull? Try filming a sword-waving charge. Instant drama. But in this war, the boring plan is the one that worked. By the final years, Japan still had gutsy pilots, tough soldiers, and a powerful warrior myth. What it didn't have was fuel, food, and shipping to turn that spirit into real power. A lot of historians argue that after the shipping war was lost, defeat was basically locked in. The only questions left were how long and how bad. Yes, the atomic bombs and the Soviet invasion mattered hugely, but they landed on a Japan that had already been hollowed out by years of blockade and bombing. Scholars still argue, would blockade alone have forced surrender eventually? Maybe. What most agree on is that Japan's ability to fight a modern industrial war was already shattered. The tough truth is this: you can fight bravely and still lose everything if you let stories about honor decide how you handle fuel, ships, and factories. So what about us? Today's wars might look different, but they still run on fuel, data, and supply chains. The fundamentals haven't changed as much as the tech has. As Japan's shipping collapsed, American bombers set its cities on fire. Tokyo, Osaka, Nagoya, whole neighborhoods turned into oceans of flame overnight. Behind those flames were simple curves on a graph. Shipping down, fuel down, factory output down. It's a straight line from lost cargo ships to people walking through ruins. Soldiers' diaries from remote islands talk about eating grass, boiling leather, and watching friends die from disease long before they ever saw an American face. By mid-1945, Japan's leaders were stuck: drag the country into total destruction, or admit defeat and explode the myth of invincible honor they'd built for decades. Some officials quietly argued, we can't survive another year of blockade and bombing. Others still held onto the dream of one last huge, decisive battle on home soil. Kamikaze attacks and plans to arm civilians with bamboo spears weren't signs of strength. They were signs of a state trying to swap raw courage in for missing fuel and shipping. Meanwhile, the blockade kept tightening. Even without nukes, famine and total economic breakdown were getting closer by the month. The clock was ticking either way. The atomic bombings and the Soviet invasion shocked the leadership. For many, they also offered a way out. A face-saving excuse to stop a war they knew couldn't be won. In his surrender speech, Emperor Hirohito talked about enduring the unendurable to save the people. Between the lines, you can hear it. Honor had to step aside for survival. The war ended the moment Japan's rulers finally chose staying alive over staying consistent with their own myth. Waiting that long cost millions of lives. After the war, some officers admitted it openly. They'd fought a war of emotion instead of a war of calculation. Their samurai-style ideals blinded them to industrial reality. It's easy to say, well, that's just Japan. But most countries love heroic myths and hate the gray, technical world of logistics and administration. This isn't only a Japanese story. The trap is universal, spending big on stuff that looks strong on camera, while ignoring the unsexy systems that actually keep a country running in a long crisis. So the hardest lesson from the Pacific isn't about one battle, it's that honor, courage, and sacrifice can't rescue a strategy that pretends shipping, supply, and economics don't exist. Which brings us to you and me. When the next big crisis hits, will our leaders choose lines that sound good in a speech, or the unglamorous realism that might actually save lives? Today, ships still move oil and food, but our lifelines also include undersea cables, data centers, chip fabs, and financial networks like SWIFT. Modern arteries, same basic problem. Instead of torpedoes and mines, we talk about export bans, tech controls, and cutting rivals off from key components. The tools changed, but the pressure logic? Very familiar. Modern societies have their own honor stories. National pride, ideological purity, heroic military gestures. Those stories can quietly push leaders towards symbolic moves over practical ones. The new samurai mistake would be this: buy weapons that look amazing on TV while letting ports, software, roads, and logistics systems fall apart in the background. So, first takeaway, respect the boring work. Put smart people and real money into supply chains, maintenance, and planning, not just into shiny jets and loud speeches. Second takeaway, always question heroic myths. If a policy is sold with words like honor or glory, Ask what it does to the actual systems that keep people fed, warm, and employed. Third takeaway, be honest about ethics. Economic warfare and sanctions can work, but like blockades, they usually hit ordinary people first. Realism doesn't cancel responsibility. Maybe real honor today isn't about last stands at all. Maybe it's about building systems that prevent pointless wars, protect civilians, and leave fewer people starving in the dark. Looking back at the Pacific, the tragedy isn't only that so many died, it's that so many died for a story. A story that pretended honor could replace logistics. So here's our final question. In the next big test, will we chase honor that looks cool on camera or pick the quiet, uncinematic realism that actually keeps people alive?